The sanctions are here to stay. This is time for us for resolve and not for appeasement.
Ursula von der Leyen's message loud and clear in her State of the European Union message to drive home the point. The EU Commission President sporting the yellow and blue, as you saw, of the Ukrainian flag in Strasbourg at the European Parliament. She had sitting as her guest of honor Ukraine's First Lady. We'll ask about von der Leyen's message and the cost of a quick segue away from Russian oil and gas. Meanwhile, here in Paris, it was the French Prime Minister rolling out the government's plan to get households and small businesses through a winter as bills skyrocket to avoid blackouts in a worst-case scenario. Well, an extra sweater and quick showers strongly recommended. Do EU citizens have the resolve to deal with what's quietly turning into a wartime economy, one where strategic imperatives trump individual priorities? Is saving energy compatible with a consumer society that's based usually on more? Worries about the end of the month are real. There's also the end of humanity, a rekindling of wildfires in the southwestern Bordeaux region, a reminder for the French that the freak weather of the summer of 22 may in fact be the new normal the world over. How fast can we adapt? Today in the France 24 debate, Europe's plan for winter. And joining us is Adina Revol, spokesperson for the European Commission here in France. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Also with us, Nicolas Mélan, senior advisor at EV Volumes. EV stands for electric vehicles.
Exactly. Good evening, François.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to Philippe Charles, energy researcher at the Sapiens Institute think tank. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
And joining us from London, Charlotte Mainviel, co-chair of the UK chapter of the French Green Party. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you, François.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. A reform of the way Europe prices electricity, a windfall profit tax. Well, it's of sorts. It was sold as a cap on exceptional profits. That's what Ursula von der Leyen said. This State of the European Union message was all about stealing resolve ahead of winter. Kathy Clifford has more.
As the colder months draw closer, energy prices continue to soar in Europe as a result of Russia's war in Ukraine. To get through the winter, the EU has major changes in mind for the electricity market, including rationing energy, temporary state aid, decoupling the prices of gas and electricity, as well as capping the income of non-gas producers.
It is wrong to receive extraordinary record revenues and profits benefiting from war and on the back of our consumers. In these times, profits must be shared and channeled to those who need it most.
Von der Leyen said the EU is transitioning to reliable suppliers, naming the US, Norway and Algeria. Longer term, Brussels wants greater reliance on renewables. She also announced the creation of a new bank designed to spur investment in hydrogen as a green alternative to fossil fuels. Ukrainian First Lady Olena Zelenska was guest of honor for the occasion, wearing Ukraine's colors in support for Kyiv. Von der Leyen said despite the strain, there was no question of easing sanctions on Russia.
And I want to make it very clear. The sanctions are here to stay. This is time for us for resolve and not for appeasement.
EU energy ministers will meet on September 30th to decide on the Commission's emergency energy plan.
Adina Revol, it was interesting to watch the question answers as well that followed. It seems as though there's a near consensus within the chamber of the European Parliament. Russia's the aggressor, and Europe has to fight back. The question then becomes how and how far does the EU go in supporting consumers and households? What's the EU's actual role in all of this?
Well, from the very beginning, the European Commission tried to do it utmost in order to protect the consumers with a focus on vulnerable consumers. We start the action to protect the consumer last year in October with strong action, for instance, providing for vouchers which are then implemented by member states. So les chèques énergie in France are a typical example which functions very well. And this is on the regulatory side. But we have also heavily invested with the recovery plan, the 800 billion euro, this historic investment. We heavily invested in the green transition, in infrastructure, and also on energy efficiency in the buildings, because the cheapest energy, the safest energy, is the energy we don't use.
And in her speech, she did slip in a windfall profits tax, although she didn't call it that because otherwise it would be very complicated. You need to have a treaty if you use the word tax.
Well, it's a contribution because, as President von der Leyen said, excessive benefits must be shared today in a spirit of solidarity. And the proposal the Commission made today are based on Article 122 of the treaty, which is an article which speaks about solidarity in the area of energy. So what we are doing today is about solidarity. It's about sharing solidarity, and we need qualified majority in order to obtain that. Having said that, there has been a major consultation before. Energy Minister met last week in order to discuss the proposals, and the Commission objective is to channel a lot of consultation and to obtain consensus.
Nicolas Mélan, what were your thoughts when you were watching the European Commission President decked out in blue and yellow there, and really, again, I say it, talking about measures that you wouldn't have expected would be the European Union's remit just a few years ago?
Well, whether it's with the European Commission or it's in France, we talk a lot about the consumer, protect the consumer, give him some voucher. We don't talk too much about small companies. We don't talk too much about industry. We don't talk too much about municipalities. And for the time being, they see the energy prices multiplied by 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm a bit worried, to be honest with you. And we see some first sign in Germany with a couple of industry which are just closing factories. And this is something which either has not been anticipated or that they don't have a plan yet to address it. But we probably are heading into a major disindustrialization of Europe.
Disindustrialization?
Yes, we had an example of this 10 years ago when the US started to develop shale gas, and the gas became 3 times as cheap in the US than in Europe. And a couple of companies moved their plant from Europe to the US. And now the gas is not 3 times as cheap in the US, it's 10 times as cheap. So this is for me a worrying factor, and it's all the more worrying that I don't see anybody talking about it.
Well, we did hear the Commission President in her speech talk about bringing industry back to Europe, talking about how the realization that there's a strategic imperative there too.
Yeah, of course, and especially on the battery cells, because battery cells, for the time being, for electric cars, they are produced 80% in China from coal, and there is this initiative. But how do you produce a battery cell? With a solar panel? No, with gas. So if you don't have any gas, or if it's too expensive, for example, you'll have to look at what's going on with Tesla in Berlin. Would be interesting because with skyrocketing prices, they cannot make profit anymore.
I want to bring in Charlotte Mainviel on this, just to ask you to play London correspondent for a second, because just before the Queen passed away last week, we heard the new Prime Minister unveil her energy plan, and it did offer compensation for consumers. But Liz Truss has been criticized because no mention was made of small businesses. When you compare what's going on both sides of the channel, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that there's some positives and there are some negatives. I think, of course, what Liz Truss has announced is insufficient, but what Elizabeth Borne has announced as well, giving 100 to 200 vouchers to people, is hugely insufficient when you look at the crisis that we have. ahead. I do think in terms of taxing of super profits or high profits on companies, countries like the UK or Spain or Italy have already made some steps towards that at the national level. So there has been some progress in that respect.
So what we're talking about, obviously, what happens at the EU-wide level, what happens in terms of nations themselves. Let's look at those announcements made by the French Prime Minister. Gas prices continuing to skyrocket throughout the continent. They vary wildly from one country to the next. This chart that you're looking at includes the United Kingdom. France's government warning electric bills will rise this winter, although at least until December 31st, says the Prime Minister, they will be capped at 15%, over today's rates.
Only restraint and European solidarity will allow us to avoid cuts and rationing in the most pessimistic scenarios, such as a particularly cold winter combined with supply difficulties. These scenarios encourage us to pursue our strategy: voluntary restraint rather than imposed cuts, and European solidarity to better resist the winter.
Charles, your reaction there to Elisabeth Borne spelling out what could be a worst-case scenarios where, to avoid blackouts, we're going to have to lower the thermostat a little, perhaps add an extra sweater, and do what it takes so that those businesses can keep, because the businesses will be the first ones to have to shut down their power if there are shortages.
The problem in France is a double problem, because first, there is effectively the gas crisis. And the gas crisis is probably less in France than in other European countries like Germany, Austria, or other countries from Central Europe. In France, Russian gas only represents 3% of the total energy consumption, primary energy consumption.
But we have an interconnected grid with neighboring countries.
Alors, we have but essentially, the gas coming from Russia in France is liquefied natural gas. So it doesn't come really by the pipe, so it can arrive independently of other countries. But currently, the problem in France is that France relies for its electricity essentially on nuclear power. And we know that more than half of the nuclear reactors are currently shut down for different reasons. And so if France has not too huge gas problem, it's possible that it will have a huge electricity problem, and this electricity problem is in fact completely disconnected from the Ukrainian war, and the current government and the previous government have a huge responsibility on the current electric situation.
All right, it is and it isn't, because in the past you could just get some electricity and some power from neighboring countries.
Yes.
Now, with what's going on, everybody's got to be more mindful.
What is also quite important is that currently the price of electricity is built according to the price of gas.
Yeah, there's a rule. It's the highest type of energy, correct me if I'm wrong,
so
that determines the price. And we heard the pledge by the Commission President that she wants that reformed. And that
which is not easy at all, because in fact it's called the merit order rule. It means that in fact it's the last source of electricity that makes the price, and the last source is the most expensive, and the most expensive today is the gas source.
So it's hard to reform that.
And so they want to reform that, but we don't know how, because in fact previously when you had electrical companies, national electrical companies, independent in each country, it could work. But currently, with an open market of electricity, if you don't pay the electricity on this rule of merit order on the last source, it means that the last source will not be implemented, and then you could have blackout. So I think that reforming this rule is a big danger for the open electricity market to have blackout in the winter.
Adina Revol, again, I hark back to what the Commission President was wearing today, the colors of Ukraine. She had sitting next to her the First Lady of Ukraine. Can we just say it, that we are, all of Europe, in a wartime economy, and as such, the old rules when it comes to pricing don't apply?
Well, what the Commission President wanted to put emphasis today is the bravehood of Ukrainian people. They are fighting today for our values. They are paying the price of their life. And the Commission President mentioned in her speech history of the kids who have been killed during this war. So this war is about human life. And Europe has been in full solidarity with Ukraine since the 24th of February.
But are these free market rules, when it comes to electricity, as described there by Philippe Charles, do they apply when you have de facto a wartime economy, not just for Ukraine, but the whole continent?
So now, why we are speaking about all this today is because Putin is weaponizing energy. And what we have been doing at the Commission level since 24th of February is to get out of this energy dependency on Russia. So we have put into place a very important energy diplomacy in order to establish new energy partnership with USA, with Canada, with Algeria, with Qatar, in order to bring into Europe new viable partners. So we diversified gas supplies. We also increased significantly renewables in Europe. We have replaced 4 billion cubic meters of Russian gas by renewable sources. And we have a big project to have solar panels in Europe by 2026 on all commercial buildings.
But for us, the question now is how to make it through this winter.
So this winter, we have a very concrete plan, so diversification. Then we have solidarity. It has already been spoken about, solidarity with our partners in between Europe. And then the last thing, it's about saving energy. So we have adopted end of July a plan in order to decrease our consumption by 15%, the consumption of gas. Today, it's almost implemented. We decreased our consumption of gas consumption by 10%. And today, the Commission President also proposed to decrease our peak consumption of electricity in order to save gas, because it's very important to save gas, because as Mr. Charles said, in fact, when you call gas, in fact, you increase prices, because the gas is the most expensive one in the market.
Just to explain for our viewers, peak consumption, I've heard talk of apps so that you, for instance, don't run the washing machine when it's 7 p.m. at the hour when everyone's returning home.
That's right.
It means that everyone, in fact, can have a say in this winter security of supply. It means that indeed when the consumption is at the highest, we need to consume less.
Charlotte Mainvielle, when you hear what the Commission President said earlier, what do you see as the best way for Europe to make it through the winter?
I mean, I think one thing is we absolutely need to reduce of course, our energy consumption. But what I want to say is that currently we're paying the price of our energy dependency on fossil fuels, and we hugely need to invest in renewable energies. And that hasn't been done. France has actually been the only European country that hasn't respected its own commitments of investment in renewable energies. So if we are needing to depend more on wind and the sun rather than fossil fuels currently. So what we need to do is invest in that. We also need to insulate homes. That's something that's been lacking, and it can be quite quick to do that. I know you're talking about this current winter, but actually we could have a huge impact if we insulated homes on a massive scale, and that would both have the benefit of reducing energy costs for people, as well, of course, as having a positive impact on the planet. We also need to invest in green transportation and make sure that our lifestyles are less dependent on mobilities that are polluting. And I know it can seem harsh to think that we need to change our lifestyles, but actually we don't really have a choice if we want future generations to be able to live on this planet. And those changes of lifestyle can also be positive and optimistic, you know, actually focusing more on our well-being. If we look at the UK, there's been an implementation of a test of a 4-day work week, for example, which has seen positive impacts both on people as well as environmental impacts. So I think we need to rethink our economy and rethink our lifestyles and our procedures in that sense.
Can capitalism be green, Philippe Charles? After all, it's based on selling more stuff and buying more stuff. We talk about growth. We talk about that's antinomical with saving energy.
I would say that first, fortunately, we didn't follow Germany and to implement more renewable in France. Our nuclear park is not in a good state, but fortunately, we have it. This is the first, my first remark. The second one is that I don't believe at all in the European plan because for two reasons. First of all, it's impossible when you look at the volumes of gas imported from Russia to diversify the supply. For a single reason. The diversification of the supplies come essentially from natural liquefied gas, and the volume of natural liquefied gas worldwide are not sufficient to replace the Russian gas this winter.
But they say that the supplies are up. And Adina Oval was saying that they're closing in on the target, even though they haven't reached it.
If you look at Qatar, if you look at Algeria, if you look at Norway, they will not be able to supply 160 billion of cubic meter, which is the importation of gas before the war. This is my first remark. The second remark is about the 10% of energy economy. You have to know that over the last 20 years, the reduction of energy consumption was 1% per year. We want to pass from 1% to 10%. 10%, if I remember, Nicolas, was in fact reducing consumption during the first blackout, not blackout,
the first 2020.
The first lockdown.
Lockdown, sorry,
of 2020.
in 2020. So are French or European ready to transform the pandemic lockdown in an energetic lockdown? I am not so sure.
Do we need
just if I may, we manage, in fact, today, as I said, Putin is weaponizing energy, and we have been importing 155 billion cubic meters at the beginning of the year, and today we went at 9% our full consumption of gas imported from Russia.
No.
And why? Because we have 13 member states which are not receiving no more gas from Russia. Nord Stream 1 is closed. So basically now we increased gas imports from LNG. We have 40 BCM from extra from LNG, and Norway has become our first country of exportation of gas. Today, in fact, we are importing not a lot of Russian gas because it has been basically cut by Russia, who is weaponizing energy.
But we are in September. We are not in January, so of course the consumption is low currently.
And we don't know.
One other thing: for the first time in the European history, we have managed, in fact, to have common storage, and now the storage are 85% full, which of course will help us during the winter. And this is a major breakthrough because in the past we didn't have European storage.
So, of course, the future's unwritten, Nicolas Mélan. We don't know if it's going to be another mild winter. We've had 2 in a row. We don't know if people are going to be able to cut down on waste. A lot of the energy consumption that is, if you cut down on waste, you can save a lot. We don't know any of that yet.
Well, the problem is when we took those decisions, whether it's at the European Commission level or the French government, Russia is the largest gas supplier globally, is the largest oil supplier globally. We should have looked if we had a B plan.
Larger than Saudi Arabia on oil?
Yeah, it's the same. It's 10 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia 10 million, US 10 million. So it's the three are the three first producer. So we should have looked, okay, what's the B plan? But some people have looked at the B plan, and the answer is there is no B plan. And the B plan proposed now from the European Commission is what? You replace Russian gas by coal, and you have UK Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Italy, France, who are using their coal plants to produce electricity. You replace Russian gas by shale gas. In the US, you know, the shale gas, which you can't do in France, it's forbidden. Fracking, but France is the largest importer globally of shale gas in the US. And the third one is diesel, because what are doing companies and people in Germany, for example, they are buying diesel generators to replace gas. And something we didn't talk about is China, because thanks to China now we are paying oil not too expensive because they are in the middle of COVID. And they actually sent us 45 boats of natural gas liquefied. But where is this Chinese gas coming from? Well, it's coming partly from Russia. So it's Russian, Chinese gas. And we're doing the same on oil. For example, Saudi Arabia is buying a lot of Russian oil, transform it into fuel to fuel its electric plants. And
exporting what it says.
And they sell their own oil.
This is covered by the sanction. It cannot be because there is in the third package of sanction. This is something which is taken care of, and we cannot buy.
But Russian. It is fact, Adina Revolt, that the Saudi Arabians the Gulf states are importing Russian oil for their own personal consumption,
but
and then they're exporting what they produce.
It's the same with India as well. India is importing 1 million barrels per day of Russian oil. They make into diesel, and in diesel they sell it. They maybe mix it with other oil and they sell it to Europe.
One very important thing is that you said that we haven't thought at the European level about Plan B. In fact, the European project from the very beginning was to create an energy market which was fully integrated. And we invested a lot since 2014, since the European Union had a budget to do so. We invested 5 billion euro to interconnect Europe. And if this winter there is no difficulty in the security of supply, it's because Europe has invested in order to interconnect. So France with Germany, France with Belgium, Bulgaria with Romania. Because today, as I said, there are 13 member states which do not receive Russian gas, but we have all gas in our homes. France, ENGIE, this does not receive any longer Russian gas. It's cut. So this is something very important. Now, you mentioned the fact that indeed some member states chosen for this winter, to secure the winter, the fact that they are going to use coal. This is transitory because at the European level, and the Commission President said this morning, we are going to push further for the European transition, for the Green Deal, and she mentioned this morning the European Bank for Hydrogen, for instance.
All right, here in France, a summer of drought slowing hydroelectric stations, while there were, as Philippe was mentioning, maintenance issues at nuclear power plants with outputs sizably down. Enter the return of coal. This plant is in the Lorraine region near the German border. It was supposed to be converted to a biomass fuel factory, which is really felt as a setback for those operating this plant at Saint-Avold, which this winter could heat up to 1/3 of the homes in northeastern France.
We are going back to coal, but we know it's not right. We know we pollute. In a sense, it's a failure because having to restart the plant means the state could not do otherwise. So for ecology, for our planet, and for kids, it's a failure.
Charlotte Maviel, your reaction, is this just, well, unfortunately, the pain we're going to have to suffer for this winter for standing up to Russia, there is a price? Or are you haunted by what Nicolas Mélan says, that there is a game of pinnacle going on, you know, with energy going one direction, coming back another, and in the end, we're still lining the pockets of Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think sanctions are absolutely necessary, and it was great to hear, you know, of course, the president of the EU Commission maintain those sanctions. Of course, we're paying a price, but it's a much lesser price than what the Ukrainian people are having to face right now. And we're starting to see some positive effects. Ukraine is starting to get some progress during this conflict. So I think that's important to state. I think we're going to have to make some radical changes in our society. And I think the proposition that Elisabeth Borne has stated is actually very weak and lacks a lot of ambition, particularly for the private sector. I think that, we need to put some cohesive measures, really. The measures that she stated on advertisement, on reducing it, for example, have been very moderate. And I think we need to think about acting much more strongly if we want to be able to not have a blackout. I think it was mentioned that, during the lockdown, we reduced our energy consumption by 10 to 15%. This is what we need to do, but we need to do it at a systemic level. And we need to support people through that process, because it's the most vulnerable in our societies that are going to suffer from that. And we need to take measures. So yes, of course, taxing corporations that are actually benefiting from this crisis, let's say it. And we also need to really think of how we change certain modes of lifestyle. We have a proposition with the Green Party, which is on banning private jets. We shouldn't be doing that when we're currently going through such a crisis, and not go back on situations. For example, Liz Truss has announced that she wants to carry out fracking again. This is really a huge step back for our planet, for our environment, for our future.
But how do you make it? Again, I asked the question. Charlotte, how do you make it through this winter? Because this transition, and Adina Revolt was telling us about this plan for the medium term, the building of solar panels. It was mentioned in the speech this morning, the building of wind turbines. But right now, how do you make it through this winter, particularly for the small businesses?
Well, we have to support them. You're talking about small businesses. I agree. We need to support them. But look at municipalities. Also, we need to support them. We're seeing that some swimming pools in France are having to close because they can't face the cost of energy. So we need to support them through that. We have to have some limitations on prices. And of course, I know you're asking me about the short-term plan, but we have to think about the medium-term plan of investing in renewables simultaneously, because otherwise we're never going to get out of this energy dependency on fossil fuels.
Philippe Charlez.
Around what has been said, I think that we have to differentiate strongly oil from gas, because so I agree on the fact that oil is moving everywhere, and I'm sure that anybody who is filling his tank today, this car, put some Russian oil in his tank, because oil can move anyway, and even if Saudi Arabia agree for sanction, you have no proof that there is no Russian oil coming in France. It's very different from gas, because gas doesn't move easily, and so it's not exactly the same. And so about sanction, I would say that sanctions on oil are not painful, but are completely unuseful. It's not the case on gas. Gas is efficient, but sanctions on gas are efficient, but on the contrary, it can be painful also for us.
I don't think we have any sanction on gas. It's Mr. Putin who has a sanction.
No, there is no sanction. There was proposition for sanction, but
it's only on oil and coal. I just wanted to add
official sanction on gas.
Just wanted to add something. When the energy decreased by 10% back in 2020, GDP also decreased by 7%.
Yeah.
By 7%. So,
but in this case, we're not asking people to stop their economic activity. We're asking them to cut down on waste.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say
I can give you a data. You take Nord Stream 1. The capacity of Nord Stream 1 is 55 BCM, billion cubic meters a year. You can, for instance, if all of European increase heating by 1 degree and decrease cooling, they increase cooling by 1 degree.
They decrease the heat. They turn down the thermostat.
Turns down by 1 degree. And if everyone accepts to have 1 degree less on heating, it's the full capacity of Nord Stream 1 in terms of economy. So basically, all of us, we can do something. Then, of course, on industry can be paid, in fact, in order to stop producing at peak hours. And what has been proposed also today goes into that direction, in fact, because there are this solidarity levy which will be paid by the companies will help SME, because you were speaking about SME at the very beginning of your intervention, and you are right, because the SMEs are the
small, medium businesses.
The small and medium businesses, they are the
heart of the economy.
Exactly. We have 25 million small and medium businesses in Europe. So today, the Commission also proposed to have them regulated prices, which means that today you, me, and all of us, we can have regulated prices.
It's up to 2 million euro, right?
This is an essential question, because what you're asking is, are we willing to make a bit of a sacrifice? Let's give an example here. Despite its long ocean coastline, France finds itself behind the curve when it comes to offshore wind farms. At the mouth of the Loire River, the Atlantic seaport of Saint-Nazaire has just put one wind farm online. And there are grumblings among the locals that the turbines are, well, an eyesore. Most of the candidates, by the way, in the recent French presidential elections came out against offshore wind farms. Again, mixed jury when partner station France 3 spoke to local residents along the shoreline.
It's ugly. Well, if someone thinks it's aesthetic, I do not.
We hardly see them when the sky is gray. We can see them a bit more when the sun is shining, but I think it will progressively blend into the landscape.
I come from La Baule, and buildings on the seafront are no better.
For locals, it isn't great, but if it produces clean energy, or green energy as we say, then maybe we can make concessions.
All right, so what is an eyesore? We can go into that debate. But Nicolas Mélan, again, it's whether or not, with the creature comforts that we have become used to in the 21st century, we're willing to turn the thermostat down. My cousin is in the double glazing business. He told me that after World War II in France, the average temperature in a house in the wintertime was somewhere between 17 and 19 degrees Celsius. Today, it's 24.
Well, definitely, if it's 24, we have some room to reduce this. But the problem is we shouldn't talk about average. We should talk about the poorest people who are already at 14 and 15. And you're not going to ask them to go to 13, obviously. So we have to take care, obviously, of them. That's the objective of these vouchers. But what I'm a bit worried about, because we will be able to support consumers, eventually SMEs, maybe big companies. That's what we did for COVID in France, 600 billion euros of additional debt for our kids. They thank us for this. So we have room. In France, we have only spent 50 billion for the time being, so we have another 550. But the game stops at one single point. It's when the financial market attack our debt, which is now 3,000 billion euros. The debt in Italy is 3,000 billion euros. And when they don't want to finance it anymore, this is when we have a problem. And because the central bank have been printing money for the last 10 years.
They're raising interest rates now.
Exactly, but they can't, because now we are full of debt. So that's the end of the game. They've printed so much money that they've created this inflation that we see here. And now raising inflation rate, this could be probably the biggest challenge of European countries in the coming months, how to finance their debt.
Philippe Charles?
Yeah, I agree with Nicolas. We think today that the president said that inflation, which is true, is less in France than in some other countries. But the difference is, in fact, in the depths, because currently we found oil, we found gas, we found electricity. But this has a cost. The state pay, and who is the state is the citizen who will pay, or the future citizen who will pay.
Thus, the question of this windfall profit tax. Your thoughts on that?
The windfall profit tax is also extremely different if we speak about oil, gas, and electricity, because windfall tax are not applicable for on my point of view, for oil and gas for a single reason, is that the profit are made outside Europe, essentially, because Europe doesn't produce any gas and any oil. So it's extremely difficult from, I would say, law speaking, to implement such taxes. What is applicable in Europe? It's taxes on the high price of electricity. And you have to know that the company who make more profit today are the company producing renewable energy, because in fact the cost of the energy is quite low, in the range of 60, 70 euro per megawatt hour, and in fact the price of electricity is paid 400 or even 500 euro per megawatt hour. You have to know, for instance, that the Swedish group IKEA has 100 windmill in France and make a lot of profit, probably more profit with windmills than with furnitures.
So Charlotte Mainvielle, if you have a company like the French energy giant Total Energy that makes huge profits, and part of those profits come from renewables, they're investing heavily in them, how do you tax it?
Well, I mean, I think we totally have to tax it, first of all, which we really aren't doing. And I think we really have to forcefully intensify the investment in renewables. You were talking about offshore wind energy there. France has taken a lot of, delay in terms of investing in those sectors. We see countries like Scotland or in Denmark that have made much better and faster progress than we have. So we have to, ban the possibility of extracting new fossil fuels, such as Total is like looking to start a new project in Uganda right now. That's just something that we shouldn't be allowing in this current crisis. So we need to tax those profits, the profits that are being made from this crisis, and we really need to accelerate that transition. One sector we haven't talked about as well is the agricultural sector, and we need to shift to a model of more agroecology, and we also need to reduce our meat consumption, which we know has a huge impact on the planet and on the environment. And it's not just about reducing our the way we're heating, but there's lots of things. And transportation we've talked about as well. We need to change our transportation modes, and we also need to change the way we eat and the way our agricultural system is produced.
The number one line item in the EU budget remains the common agricultural policy. A lot of times it's subsidies that go to the big farmers, not the small.
Exactly.
Should there be a Dina Revol, more scrutiny and more rules when it comes to how green farming is?
I will answer that question just after having said that on the price cap on renewables and, for instance, on nuclear energy, which is produced on today in the market, which has lower production costs than the prices. The Commission President proposed today a very concrete measure, a price cap on 180 euro megawatt hour, and this will produce 140 billion euros. So this is hugely and very important. In order, you spoke about the vulnerable consumer in Europe. They are 10% of the European citizens, so it's very important to protect them. Now on agriculture, I already mentioned the Green Deal. The Green Deal, it's our common ambition to be climate neutral by 2050. And it's not only energy, it's transport, but it's also agriculture, it's biodiversity, environment. And we have just started now a new cycle in the budgeting of common agriculture policy, and in that respect, we are greening our
with less energy consumption.
It's one of the areas. We have also areas of improvement in terms of using of intrants in the agriculture, in terms also of
herbicide and pesticides.
Pesticide, it's also in energy, or for instance on methanization in agriculture, and also they have to become become much more environmental friendly in order to access the European subsidies.
All right, so much more to say about this and about what happens both in the short and the long term. Unfortunately, we're running short on time. I want to thank Charlotte Miviel for being with us from London, Adina Revol, Philippe Charles, Nicolas Mélan. More coverage on our website, france24.com.